Well, since I guess this is the first one of these, I should probably introduce myself. My name is NJ Sullivan. I am an author and an audio drama / audio fiction writer and producer. And welcome to my journey into sound. I'm doing this vlog because I want to share my love of the medium of audio drama or audio fiction, we'll get into that in a little bit, with everyone who wants to listen. I have a great passion for working in audio and telling stories. And I want to share all of that with you. I also want to share my journey as I learn more about this. I am not a trained anything, really, and this is all learning on the go. I already know a little bit, but I know I have a lot to learn, and I want to share the ups and downs of all of that with you and share my passion for it with you and just share the utter joy that I feel when I create. And hopefully pass some of that along to you as well. So let's start out with the absolute basics here. An audio drama is not an audiobook. It is, they used to call it radio plays. It's not read to you, it's performed for you. You're not told the story. You're given the story. You experience it. I'll get into that a little bit more in a little while here too. An audiobook, you're being read the story. In audio drama or audio fiction, I use the terms interchangeably. I don't think there's really a consensus on it yet. If I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will tell me. You experience it. And that's one of the main aspects about it I love, which I will talk about more later. So that is what separates an audio drama from an audiobook. You are experiencing the story, not being told the story. Why do I love audio fiction so much? Audio drama so much? It's a completely different experience than reading a book or listening to an audiobook. There is diegetic sound. You are not told that a twig broke in the woods. You hear a twig break in the woods. And with modern technology, you can hear where in the space the twig broke. You aren't told that somebody's voice is cracking or that somebody sounds angry. You hear them sound angry. You hear their voice crack with emotion. You hear them yell. And there's just something very immediate and visceral and experiential. I'm not sure if I'm using that word right, but I guess I'll be told if I'm not. About that. About being in the moment with these characters that you don't really get even from watching a movie. And another part of that is because it's in your ears. It's not on a screen. It's not flat in front of you. It's not on a page where your brain is translating it from words into images and sounds. It is visceral. It is right there. You are as much in it as the characters are. And it's just a remarkable experience to me. And a really good audio drama is an experience like none other. My journey with audio drama started out actually pretty young. My parents would quote The Shadow and The Lone Ranger and all the audio dramas they grew up listening to in the 50s and the 60s. And we had cassettes, aging myself a little bit, yes, but we had cassettes of audio dramas that we would listen to in the car or at home. There was always that kind of undercurrent of audio and storytelling, and I've always had a passion for both, for sound and storytelling. It was kind of bred into me very young. And then when I was 10 years old, the night before Halloween, my parents and I were driving home from my grandmother's house at night, and one of the local radio stations, it was about an hour drive, and one of the local radio stations was doing War of the Worlds, the Orson Welles late 1930s or 1940s, I forget which right now, War of the Worlds. And we were in the car driving in the dark, these country back roads, listening to the story happen as we drove along. And it just absolutely entranced me. As I was saying earlier, I was in that moment with those characters, and they were talking to me. I was hearing their voices, hearing the things going on around them. Hearing, the radio station get interrupted for a news report. And it was like it was happening in real time, and it was happening to people who were just on the other side of those speakers, even though they were mostly all long dead. It was still real. There was a verisimilitude to it that I hadn't gotten from anything else, and I fell in love with it. I thought even back then about wanting to produce audio dramas myself, even, 10, 11 years old. But you needed a studio. You needed microphones. You needed actors. You needed editing equipment. You needed all sorts of stuff that I didn't have or have access to. Not just because I was, a preteen, but also because it was incredibly cost prohibitive. So I kind of set that dream aside for a while and fulfilled my storytelling love by writing novels and short stories. And I kind of set aside audio for a long time at that point. And that brings us up to a couple years ago. I, as I said, was writing novels, and I was publishing, and I was having decent success with it. And I wanted to try a new way of promoting those. And I already had a Twitch account, and I was streaming on Twitch, and I had done YouTube before, and I had some better equipment now that I was a grown-up, and technology had advanced significantly from the late 80s. And I said, well, why don't I try doing live reads of excerpts of some of my stories on live streams and see if maybe that can drum up some interest in my books. And I started doing it, and it did. It drew up it got some interest, and people enjoyed it. And I was speaking to my, at the time, girlfriend, now my wife. And I said, I'd like to try to do one that's just audio. Because I realized that dream of producing audio dramas that I had so many years ago and that was still kind of rumbling around in the back of my head, everything I needed to do it was sitting on my desk. The computer for recording, microphones that I used previously on stage or that I had gotten for doing live streaming. Everything I needed was available to me now. And if I didn't have it on me, I could easily get it. She completely supported that idea. So I did an experiment. I wrote about a 2.5 minute story called Late for My Train. And I put it out into the world as a podcast. I had fallen in love with the story when I was writing it, and I knew I was going to do more. So I put it out as a podcast. Because the other thing that 10, 11, 12-year-old me didn't have was any way to distribute. And now there was podcasting. And that barrier to entry was completely gone. So I put it out as a podcast, and it gained traction. And I did 15 episodes and started planning for a new season. I did some comedy sci-fi stuff. I did a few other stories and just had an absolute blast. COVID hit, and we were stuck in the house, and I kept working on it, and I kept putting things out, and people were enjoying it. And then my fiance at the time and I founded Lantern Audio Works to produce audio fiction, audio dramas, and some podcasts that we really were excited about. And she was doing a podcast where she told folk and fairy tales from around the world, and I was doing original audio fiction. She was planning some original audio fiction. And we did that in 2001. Or 2021. Sorry about that. And it was going along great. We were putting out new stuff. People were enjoying it, really gaining momentum. And in March of this year, 2023, she had a massive stroke. She survived it, and she's getting better, but everything got put on hold. Everything had to stop. Her health and her care and her recovery had to take priority over everything. So it did, and of course it still does. But now she is recovering, not in constant danger anymore. And during that period of recovery, when she was in the hospital and when she was early on in her rehabilitation, I started wondering why I was putting things out as a podcast. I was starting to feel a lot of stress from it, because podcasts require you to be consistent. It's a part of the thing. You know, you put out an episode every month, or you put out an episode every 2 weeks or every week or however often, but people expect regular releases. And a lot of the stories that I was wanting to tell were limited. They didn't continue forever. And you run into an issue there with podcasts, because once the story ends, if you want it to stay available, you have to keep paying for it to stay up on the hosting services. And we don't have a whole lot of money. And the amount of stories I wanted to do, that would have been in the hundreds of dollars a month over time. So I started looking for alternatives. I started asking myself, why are we doing podcasts when it's really hard to monetize? Advertisers prefer a more informational type podcast to audio fiction or audio dramas. Also, I can't do these stories that are only a half an hour long or an hour long. I tried to set up a system where I'd have a bunch of shorter stories on one podcast, but the organization isn't set up for that. The platform isn't set up for that kind of thing. So I really couldn't and have it make any sense. So I started looking into music outlets, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, things like that. And right now we're going with Bandcamp so that I can release different things and not have that stress of having to constantly have something coming out and people getting confused as to, oh, you know, there was a sci-fi story here before, and now all the new stuff is supernatural detective stories. Or, you know, that was a serious one and now it's a comedy. What happened? You know, it can be avoided by putting them all out individually. And they only have to go out once. You don't have to be constantly updating with new episodes. You don't have to worry about losing momentum if you stop releasing to take a break. And so right now, that is what we're doing. And that is where we think our best bet is to make this viable. So, yeah, that's where we're at now. So what comes next for us? What comes next for me as a creator? Well, more stories, definitely. I've started working in immersive audio to make the already immersive platform of audio drama even more immersive by bringing the sound around you so that you can hear where something's coming from, as I mentioned earlier. You can hear where it's coming from. You can hear if it's getting closer and what direction it's coming from. And it opens up a whole new perspective, a whole new asset to making the stories even more engaging. So that is something that we're currently working on. And this is technology that already exists. We're not breaking new ground here. People do this, but we are just getting into it now. So more stories, larger cast productions, not exclusively larger cast productions, but bringing in more people from the outside to work with us on these projects and to increase the depth and take some of the weight off of me, because I was doing all of the voices, doing both shorter fiction and longer series type fiction, because that's all possible for us now. So that's where we're headed. That's the dream. That's the goal. As to what you can expect from this vlog, I want to bring you on the journey with me. I want to share it with you. Hopefully once a week. That's going to be my goal. They might not all be as long as this one, but hopefully once a week I will be able to release a new episode and bring you guys up to date, maybe teach you about how I work. I'm sure I'll get a lot of disagreement from people who've been in the business for a while about that, and share this with you. So that's going to be all from me for today, and I really hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, subscribe, comment, etc., etc. And thank you for joining me on my journey into sound.